Hi, this is Heath Ransom of Grace, Truth, and Torah/Law, and this is part 4 of our Age of the Earth series. And we're going to continue on the Tower of Babel today. Peleg, and his name meaning division, but also the 119 pattern in which the story of the Tower of Babel is found on, which I referred us back to. It is to the biblical feasts, and we talked about Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits. And what happens in springtime? Things bloom, they come out, they're released, it comes to newness of life. We talked about whenever the Passover is found in the Bible, they came out in Egypt, they came out, Jesus became the Passover lamb, the system of Rome. Um, it is a time of bloom and it is a time of coming out. Now, we talked about Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruits, and the time and season that it happens in March and April, commonly known as Easter, that people use. We know the months as March, April, but the biblical months are Nisan, Abib. And we talked about a Jewish prayer book called Siddur. And when first fruits happen, they read something called Psalms 119. And on Psalms 119, it is an acrostic Psalms. It is marked Psalms. And at first fruits, they start reading the first Sunday after the Shabbat. And yesterday I had said that first fruits was the 15th to the 21st, which is, it's actually unleavened bread is 15th to the 21st. The 15th day to the 21st day, and Passover is on the first month, the 14th day. And this happens around a full moon. And those months, those days that I just gave you are on moon days. Now, we talked about Psalms 119, or this first fruit pattern, being acrostic psalms. And they read Psalms 119, they read 8 verses on the first Shabbat, the first Sunday after the Shabbat, or the Sabbath, and they count 49 days, the 50th day, to Shavuot or Pentecost, where we're supposed to receive the word, and they read Psalms 119. 8 verses. Psalms 119 is an acrostic psalm, so every 8 verses, the first 8 verses are Aleph, the second 8 verses are Bet, the third 8 verses are Gimel, the fourth, so forth, to Daleh, all the way to Tav, and there's 22 times 8, there's 176 verses. Now, almost all Bibles, you can see that in there. Now, in some of the older Bibles, before King James consolidated all the Bibles back in 1600, or 1611 when the King James Bible came out, but the commission started in about 1603, 1604 to do this. Some of the Bibles had Psalms 118 as Psalms 119. And somehow it got changed. And there's a reason why these got changed. There was a lot of study and time because they wanted to get things back into the proper order and perspective. Okay? Now, we talked about these acrostic psalms. I said Psalms 111 was an acrostic psalms. Psalms 112 is an acrostic psalms. But in between Psalms 119, in between Psalms 111, 111, and 119, there's these Egyptian or Babylonian Hallel. And the way you can tell these Hallel is if you read them, Psalms 113 to 118, they'll say, praise the Lord, praise ye the Lord. You'll see that in there, so they define them. In the latter part of the Psalms, 145 to 150, around there, these are Hallels too. And you can see it because it'll say, praise ye the Lord, or praise the Lord. You can see that right in the text. And these were designed, Psalms 113 to 118, Egyptian or Babylonian Hallel, to read at Passover time. So that's what they were created for. That's their design text. The fact that there's an acrostic marking Psalms 111, an acrostic marking Psalms 119, is significant to say that it's being preserved, it's being marked because it's very important. The fact that the story of the Tower of Babel that we talked about yesterday was on Genesis 11, verses 1 to 9, 111 to 119. It is the exact same design as the Psalms 111 to 119. Now I'm saying this to say the following. In the story of the Tower of Babel, we talked briefly yesterday about two scriptures, Genesis 10:21 and 10:25. 10:21, it says, "And unto Shem, the father of all the children of Eber," father of all the Hebrews, that's what Eber means, "the brother of Japheth the elder, even unto him were children born." So then we went to Genesis 10:25, and it says, "Unto Eber," because we want to know Shem's the father of all the children of Eber. Well, we need to know who Eber's children are now, so we need to go to Genesis 10:25 to define that. So when we go to Genesis 10:25, it says, "Unto Eber were born two children. The name of one was Peleg. For in his days," or in his lifetime, "the earth was divided." Peleg means division, but in his days the earth was divided. So when the Tower of Babel occurred, and there was the confusion, and the earth was divided, it happened in Peleg's days. In Genesis 11, verses 18 and 19, it tells us that Peleg lived 239 years. So it was a 239-year period in Peleg's days that the earth was divided. Very important to know and to remember, when I talk about Peleg, I want you to think of Tower of Babel, I want you to think of 119, and I want you to think of first fruits. But I also want you to think of separate and separated. This is where they began to be known as Hebrews, to be set apart. They were first fruits, separated from the system of Babel. Okay? Let's continue. Oh, excuse me. Separate. So we talked about Psalms 119 briefly. So let's reiterate on that a little bit more. Psalms 119 had his statutes, his testimonies, his precepts. We talked about it being done by Ezra. Ezra was a scribe and priest readying the Torah of the Lord. He returned from Babylonian captivity with Joshua and Zorobabel. We talked about the word Zorobabel having the word mystery or secret in it. Mystery or secret of Babylon the Great. Joshua was another name for salvation or deliverance. They returned after 70 years to rebuild the temple. It was a physical temple. But for our time, and how we're going to see it, the temple represents the people, and the rebuilding is their hearts, to remove the stony hearts. Jesus is the cornerstone, that the head of the corner that the builders rejected. We are lively stones, as Peter says, built on that cornerstone. Our bodies are the temple where Christ dwells. We are the temple. Now, in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 21, there's a scripture that says, "When shall be the sign of his coming? When shall be the sign of the end? When not one stone upon another is thrown down." And we're going to get into understanding what that means when we get into the Twin Towers. We talk about ground zero and all the stones being laid even with the ground. That represents religion. And there's going to be a rebuilding here on the earth. And it's not about religion anymore. It's about relationship. And it's the rebuilding of the hearts and minds of the people. The true temple. Okay? We always want to look at it as a location or a place. Well, that's going to come true in those aspects. But we have to get into an understanding to understand that we are the temple. We are his children. We are his sons. We carry the kingdom of heaven within us. Okay? That is a beautiful way to look at things. Now, this Psalms 119 and how we relate it to first fruits and how this system of Babel or Babylon would be in play. But I want you to look at one other 119 pattern because I want to give you more examples. Now, we're not going to fully get into this one right now, but I want you to see that there's other first fruit patterns in there. 2 Samuel 5 verses 1 to 10. Now this continues on into another story here after the first 10 verses. But when you go to 1 Chronicles 11 verses 1 to 9, you will see that this is the same story from 2 Samuel verses 5, 1 to 10. But the stories change there. Somebody decided to move things and change things from Samuel to Chronicles. This story moves somewhere else. This one moves somewhere else as well. And there's another thing that I would like you to look at the beginning of Chronicles, since we're on the 119 pattern, and I told you about Peleg. Well, if you look at 1 Chronicles chapter 1, verse 19, 119, you will see the name Peleg there. Just like the Genesis 111 to 119, I told you, is the story of the Tower of Babel, and it happened in Peleg's days. We just went through Genesis 10:21 and 10:25 to see those verses, okay? But now you're going to ask, well, Heath, how are you going to show me how the Twin Towers or the Tower of Babel, they're the same? How are we going to look at that? How are you going to show me how we're going to start to see that? And this is where it gets very beautiful. Now, I want you to remember something. When we look at time, when we look at his story, we got to see patterns, but we got to know who's who today, okay? We got to know how to rightly divide our word. Now, I'm going to give you some signs to look at first. Now, in the story of the Tower of Babel, Genesis 1:11 to 1:19, okay? Now, the first verse says, the world was of one language and one lip. Verse 2, it came to pass as he journeyed in the plain of Shinar. Let me just go and read it. It came to pass as they sojourned from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and dwelt there. Now, when you take this word Shinar, Shinar is where modern day Iraq is today, between the Tigris and Euphrates. The original Tower of Babel was in modern day Iraq. I want you to think about, now remember in 1991, this is where the Kuwait and Iraqi war began. We went in and we went to, because our towers were bombed, or it was attempted bombing. But that was the Gulf War, where we went into and we raided Iraq. And we took Kuwait back. Now, 10 years later in 2001, now remember we had Bush Sr. as president, and now we had Bush Jr. in 2001 as president. And in 2001, we went in and we took Iraq, we conquered the country, and Saddam Hussein consequently was executed. But what I want to talk about here is who Saddam Hussein thought he was, and where the original Tower of Babel was. Now, Saddam Hussein was starting to have money made, and he thought he was actually Nebuchadnezzar. Now, I want you to look at this as a flip. We know that there's scriptures that say Babylon will never be rebuilt in that location. It will remain a perpetual desolation forever. Okay, there's scriptures that say that in Jeremiah, and we know that to be true. And we know this from Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great, from the Grecian Empire, he went through and he conquered the world, and he thought that he was going to rebuild Babylon. And, of course, he died at a mysterious age, 33, over in that area, because the prophecies go that Babylon would never be rebuilt there. Saddam Hussein, he thought that he was Nebuchadnezzar and he was going to try to rebuild that system. Now, I want you to look at it from a different perspective. I want you to see who Nebuchadnezzar is. And we're going to get into that when I give you a list of Nebuchadnezzar here in the end. Nebuchadnezzar was this head of gold in Daniel. Now remember, this is the system of Babylon. Babel, Babylon, and then Babylon in Revelation. We have this system. Okay? We talked about Babylon and the word Babel. Bet, lamed, Babel, confusion. And then when you rotate the word, it becomes lamed, bet. It's a confusion of heart. Okay? Babylon is a confusion of heart about the teaching instructions of the kingdom of heaven. Now remember, in Revelations, behold, mystery of Babylon the Great, the great whore that causes all nations to drink of her iniquity. We talked about Zorobabel and that mystery or secret of Babylon that he contained within him. Now, whenever this system arises, we're supposed to rise up and be set apart. Now I want you to think about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel. Now, Nebuchadnezzar erected this statue, and he made the whole world to bow to this image. All countries, tongues, lands, nations, people of the world. But some refused, and there was consequences for that. Of course, the Lord delivered him out of that. But the whole story remains that they were thinking to change the times and seasons, just like in that time. And I want you to see that we have legislations in play, even in our own country, that are trying to change the times and seasons. They're trying to change the commandments of our Creator, you know. And we're going to get into that list here in the end. You can't change design. He spoke it, he created, therefore it must fulfill what he said it to do. Okay? We can't remove those teachings and instructions from nature and from design. Now, what's beautiful about this is the following. Okay? When we had our Twin Towers on 9/11/2001, now I've been talking about these 119 patterns, but now I threw a loop for you because we know the Twin Towers happened on 9/11. It's a reversal of the 119. Coincidence? No, there is no coincidence in Hebrew. Everything has an order. There is no thing as luck. There is no thing as chance. There is only predictability. There is no probability. Okay? We're going to break this down, 9/11/2001. And I'm going to show you how Babylon, these were signs that we went over into Iraq, where the original Tower of Babel used to be. It was unleashing Babylon was alive again today. It was showing that it's a spiritual whore that causes all nations to drink from her iniquity. But it gets deeper than that. It's going to go to a more fiercer level. We're just hitting the tender basics of it. But the Lord will deliver his people again from it, as he has before. Now, the Twin Towers happened on 9/11/2001. Okay? Our emergency number that everybody dials is 911. Think about that for a minute. That's amazing. So, I've made some points already. I talked about us going over and taking Iraq. I talked about who Saddam Hussein thought he was and the system of Babylon, but it would never be rebuilt there. I talked about what happened to us on 9/11 in a reversal of the 119. We went through several stories in the Bible that show us Passover, unleavened bread, and first fruit have to deal with coming out of something, coming out of a system. They began to be known as Hebrews in Peleg's days. They came out. It was a separation. They were first fruits. They were returning to the original. They were caught up in a system of confusion, and they weren't going to be part of that. They weren't going to be part of the system of lies that violated the teachings and instructions of God, of the kingdom of heaven. Okay? We are again in this time, in this cycle. That is why it's important to understand your Moedim and feasts and what scriptures they read. So when you go into understanding how your Bible's set up and breaking down, you know what's happening. Because it doesn't take a genius to see what happens in nature during our seasons. Spring, summer, winter, and fall. Or fall and winter. When you know what happens, like in fall time when crops are gathered and things happen, it's easier to see, you can see the natural, but it's easier to see the spiritual application of things. I don't have to have my own doctrine and teaching and philosophy on things. Now, when a Jewish child, the first thing that he learns is the book of Leviticus. And you're like, oh my gosh, Leviticus, the first chapter is about put you to sleep. Well, when it gets into the offerings and all those things. But they learn their feasts. They learn the importance of the rules of creation and nature. Okay? So, let's continue. Now, this story of the Twin Towers on 9/11/2001 is the story of the Tower of Babel of old. I want to talk about New York City a minute. New York, New York. It is a city after its own image. Now you remember there was a guy named Enoch who was Cain's son who went and built a city after his own image. Okay? Now, when we talk about New York City, and you talk about the Twin Towers, and it was a World Trade Center. All countries, tongues, lands, and people were gathered there to buy, sell, and trade. Okay? New York is also the home of the United Nations, where everybody comes to vote to one accord. Now, in the original Tower of Babel, there was somebody named Nimrod. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, it says, and he was from the tribe of Cush. Cush means black. Now, I want you to think about that as we have a ruler and our president and how things are progressing and moving forward. Now, remember, even our President Barack Obama, he won a Nobel Peace Prize for what? For peace. They actually awarded him a Nobel Peace Prize for peace. So think about these things. Am I saying he's Nimrod? Maybe I am in some applications. But what I really want you to see is the signs in that. I want you to see all people, the world was of one language and one lip. Everybody's gathered together for a common purpose. New York City, a city after its own image. Everybody building their way to heaven man's way. This is where all these things are happening and taking place. Not to mention, the Twin Towers are ground zero. If you get into Jonathan Cahn and reading The Harbinger, and he will tell you, and he will go through these harbingers and comparing the Twin Towers to certain verses and how things are set up in the Bible. Our first president of the United States, George Washington, when we dedicated this country to God, was done at ground zero. Isn't it amazing how as we're removing God, everything would come back full circle and there would be a destruction there? Not only that, between what happened in Washington, the Pentagon, and the plane in the field, but what happened at ground zero and the first bombing of the Twin Towers and the total from the second bombing of the Twin Towers when they were totally destroyed, about 3,000 lives were taken. There's a memorial there now with waterfalls that have all the names of about 3,000 men and women from 90 countries inscribed and grafted around these waterfalls and their names. His memorial has been made known. We talked about, think about this, the 119 and them receiving. Now remember, this is a 911 now. Okay? It's an emergency. This is a reversal of this pattern. Now, what I mean by that is, as they read Psalms 119:8 verses to the story of to Shavuot or Pentecost, where and originally in Acts 2 you see 3,000 lives were added. In this story, about 3,000 lives are taken. They're not added. So we have to go through our Bible and say, why were 3,000 lives taken? So when I go to Exodus 32, the heart of the matter, and when we get into a more deeper study, the word heart actually can be lamad bet, or you can have the word Baal there. We've all heard the word Baal, or false idol, or false god. But leb, in heart is lamad bet. It's 30 and 2. It means heart, mind, core, center of anything. If we go to Exodus 32, verse 28, you will see the following. About 3,000 lives were taken. 3,000 men, or 3,000 lives. The story in Judges 16:27, about 3,000 lives were taken. We have talked briefly about when these 3,000 lives were taken, it represents a Torah scroll and the Ayetz Kayim, the trees of life, on both sides. Now remember, there's a tree of life on both sides in Revelation, where the word is going to be put back together whole. Now this Ayetz Kayim, when this 3,000 pattern, it was about the removal of God, the teaching and instructions from the land. And there was a destruction of about 3,000 lives. And there has to be a rebuilding. in the true teachings and instructions and order of creation. We have this memorial preserving this. All the signs of Babel and Babylon are contained within this. Not to mention, when we come out of Egypt or Babylon or Rome, when the feasts and this 119 pattern, and the original story of the Tower of Babel being on 119. When we go into our next lesson, when I start teaching you about Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and we talk about who Japhethic seed is, and you start to see how we're all engrafted in, you will start to see this lineage or this genealogy. I have taken you from Adam. Well, we started at the tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We went from all dimensional to dimensionality, from an infinite to a finite reality. And we started from Adam. We went to Noah. We concluded that it was 1,656 years. That has to go to a 6,000-year calendar. And we know time descended, and this line goes all the way to Jesus. We can see that in Luke chapter 3. But what we're doing now is we're heading back up this tree by the same word. Okay? And I'm talking about a guy named Peleg. So after Noah, there were Shem, Araxphid, Selah, Eber, which where the word Hebrew comes from, and this guy named Peleg. And we're also going to talk about this guy named Ru. Okay? And how to break his name down a little bit. Because this is where we are in current history or his story. Now, take all the evidence and weigh it for yourself. And you will see that once you look these up and you start to see these in here and you start to ask yourself, why would somebody put them in there like that? How did they write scripture? Why was it designed that way? Well, these were designed for this feast. This was designed for this Shabbat day or this Sabbath day. And this is how you start to learn how the Bible was put together. So when we get to main events or histories, he's going to use this feast. If the Lord is going to do anything here on the earth, because his Bible is for all countries, tongues, lands, nations, and people. It's without partiality and hypocrisy. This all aligns with nature and the rules of creation. If he's going to do anything here on the planet, he's going to use his holy days or his feasts to reveal those things. That's what they were designed for. Are you hearing me, brother and sister? His Moedim or feasts, a true priest will teach the Moedim or the feasts. A true priest will tell you the difference between the unclean and clean, or the holy and the profane. Okay? This is where we need to go back to. If someone wants to teach me about prophecy, or how the word is set up and the end times, they're going to have to show me how to go through my Bible and show me patterns. And the majority of people cannot do that. It is not because I don't believe their hearts or their intentions or their mindset is not right and they don't love the Lord. They just don't have a skill of how time and creation and how the Bible was set up. We're so busy sometimes reading what everybody else is doing and saying and feeling and thinking, we don't ever search it out for ourselves. We have to learn his design. We are in a fight, not against things we can see, but the things we can't see. But we can see them too, because they're playing themselves out. So I'm going to close with this today, and then we're going to get into part 5, where we'll go into more deeper, where I'll show you to start how to see this even deeper. 2001 plus Peleg's days is 239. But the year 2001, when the Twin Towers happened on 9/11, was the year 5761. Now remember I told you that we're going to head to a 6,000-year creation. One day equals 1,000 years. At the end of this 6,000 years, we're heading to a rest. Noah's name meaning rest, 1,000-year millennial reign. I want you to think about that, brother and sister, because I'm telling you, we intersected into time right here. And we are heading back to Noah, or the rest, the 1,000-year millennial reign. Noah's name meaning rest. And I'm saying that at 5761, now remember I told you in Genesis 11, 18, and 19, that Peleg lived 239 years. And in his days is when the story of the Tower of Babel happened, when this separation and this division. Everything's being divided out again. That's what Peleg represents. Light, darkness, day, night, positive, negative, good, evil. It's being made straight. The rough ways are being made smooth. The crooked is being made straight. 5761 plus 239 is 6,000 years. That starts the seventh day. The rest. Now God rested on the seventh day. Noah's name, as in the days of Noah, so be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. Think about this. We are heading back by the same word. And we're going to get into a more detailed study on that in the next lesson, brothers and sisters. And we're going to go through and we're going to have to learn about this 3760 and this 20 plus 2240 is the 6,000 year calendar too. But 2001 plus 239 is the 2240. We're going to start to learn that this is a line for time, past, present, and future. Our Bible is set up to a grand design of patterns. There's nothing new under the sun. The thing that hath been is that which shall be. That which shall be hath already been. There is no new thing under the sun. Babel is a confusion of heart about the teaching and instructions of the things of the kingdom of heaven. We are children of the light of the day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness, that day will ever overtake us as a thief. Did you know the word darkness in Hebrew doesn't just mean dark or black, but it means to believe lies. To understand and believe lies. That's what darkness is. We are light. There's no more darkness for us. There's no more night. We are of the day. We have found grace just like Noah did. We are sons and daughters. We are princes. We are co-inheritors. There's nothing hid that shall be in darkness that shall not be brought to light. Okay? The day of the Lord doesn't come as a thief to us because we're on watch. We're on guard. All right? Remember the Jewish wedding. We don't know the day or the hour, but we know the year, we know the time, we know the season. We are the bride. He is the groom, right? Yes. The wedding lasts 7 days. That's how a wedding works in Jewish tradition. We don't know the day or the hour that the groom is coming to get the bride, but we know the season, we know the time, we know the year. We don't know the day or the hour in that 7 days. Brothers and sisters, let us awaken to truth. Let us come out and be separate. Let us head back to the original teachings and instructions. Let's learn how the Bible was designed and put together. I love you, bless you, and we'll see you next time.